started with the meeting and go through some of the beginning, and hopefully they'll join in by the time we get to the meat of it.
Okay.
Okay. I'd like to call this meeting of the Brentwood 353 to order at 6:02 p.m. Would you please call the roll?
I will. Chairwoman Bilderback.
Here.
Andy Burkemper. Andy Burkemper.
Oh, he's
muted. I can't hear you, but I hear you. Chairman Alderman Gould.
Here.
Alderman Lockmiller.
Here.
Alderman Plufka is not here. Okay. Keith Rabenberg.
Here.
Alderwoman Sims.
Here.
Jack Shelton.
Here.
Tony Ponder. So, okay, we have 6 members of the committee are present, which represent a quorum.
great. Thank you very much. So at this point, we would need a motion to approve the agenda, presuming there's no amendments.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Steve, seconded by Jeff. And remind me, is this not a roll call vote? This can be by acclamation, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All those in favor say yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Aye. Yes.
All those opposed, no, nay. The ayes have it. The agenda is approved. Approval or amendment of meeting minutes. There is an approval of the orientation and meeting minutes from September 16th, 2020. Presuming everyone's had an opportunity to look at that, is there a motion for approval?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Motion by Steve, second by, was that Sunny?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Great. All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Minutes are approved. We also have a citizen comment portion. Are there any citizens on the Zoom meeting or the call that would like to make any comments at this time?
We have a citizen in the gallery, but no hand is raised, so I think there are no comments.
Okay, great. Thank you. So there is no old business on the agenda, and new business is the discussion of the RFP submittal and the next steps. Lisa, would you want to kick us off?
Yes, certainly. So as you're all aware, we went ahead and issued an RFP for the Brentwood Bound Redevelopment Area early September. We had a RFP submittal period of about 2 months. It was to close on November 6th. So the update on that is we did not receive any formal submissions to the RFP. So leading up to the submittal period, John and I took quite a few calls. I know I feel like I had 2 pretty good contacts established, and I would say John had maybe at least 5 or so maybe about a total of 7. Sort of surprised that maybe we didn't get any submissions, but of course that's kind of what we're going to talk about tonight, and we want to get some direction from you all. But then also, since we didn't get submissions, then John and I also did some follow-up and definitely went and contacted those that we had been working with in the past and had some dialogue going, and then also some others that had expressed interest in the past. So, you know, if we didn't get any submissions, it's like, what can we learn from this here? You know, what could we pick up? And I think what we were really interested in was there going to be any kind of common issues, if you will, that maybe was the cause or part of the cause that they didn't submit. So with that, John and I compared some notes. John took the lead in putting together, I think, a good detailed memo that was included as part of your packets and for preparation of the meeting tonight. So that's where I think we need to start, is just kind of go over that memo, and I can turn that over to John. And then I think there's probably about 3 key points. As I said, we really want to kind of get into a little bit more discussion with this group. And as I said, get some direction. So John, would you mind reviewing some of the key points of the memo that you prepared?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, the bad news is we didn't get any formal proposals. The good news is I think Lisa and I both feel there are proposals out there waiting in the wings, so to speak, because this was not without its interest. We even had one scenario where someone submitted a plan that for a project that had been built elsewhere, and said, yeah, we would do this, only we would do this instead. And it's not like there's not something out there. We just have to figure, well, several somethings, I think. We just have to figure out some key points that Lisa just mentioned. And a shout out to Andy Bergkamper. We have 2 microbreweries waiting in the wings. I mean, literally, with confirmation in writing that they would like to be there. The problem, of course, is that those people are small businesses, if you will. They don't want to be in the development business. They want to be partnered with another developer who can build the space that they would then finish out. And also our well, I don't want to say specifically, but our 100-ton gorilla in that arena has also woken up. We'll see what they have to say. I think you all know who I'm talking about. The long and the short of it is, the thing that we consistently heard, we heard it going back all the way into, Lisa, the meeting you and I had with all of the brokers at PACE, the folks from UTW, Summit, and the developer that Dan Devereaux was working with, that and this term was used twice, you see it in the memo. They're all hung up on what they described as brain damage over land acquisition. If you look at the projects that are going on right now in the metro area, both bigger and smaller, there's basically no multiple party or multiple property acquisitions. There's no, in other words, the projects are being built with land that had already been assembled. And so all the developer had to do was agree on price and go down the road and start submitting their plans. The one example where a big project is in the works, I guess is the best way to put it, which many of you are familiar with, is the thing in University City that involves where the anchor is Costco. That land acquisition required eminent domain. The land acquisition was started 3 years ago, and it's still not done. The court process simply slows that down, and the developer types get very antsy when they when you have to use that tool. In part, they don't like the negative publicity, obviously, but secondly, and maybe just as important, it's the unknown quantity in terms of what they're going to have to pay, you know, until, for example, in Missouri, you go to the condemnation commission first, typically. Those folks are appointed by the court. They're all real estate experts of one sort or another. They come back and tell the judge, well, we think it's worth X. If the property owner accepts that number, then you're pretty much done and the process is fairly quick. If they say no and take it to a jury, then that's a whole nother thing that gets into all sorts of craziness. It's one of the things that in a meeting, when was it, Lisa, back toward the first of the year, maybe, that Lisa, Bola, the mayor, Mark, and Craig and I all met because this land acquisition issue had been brought up at that point. And so to me, that's the elephant in the room at this point. And there are multiple ways to approach that.
John?
Yes.
And if I could just also interject too, this is an unusual situation for most developers, and the fact that we've got flood mitigation work that's going on. And so we're in the process of changing this environment as we speak. So we're going right now from parcels that are in the floodplain or even in the floodway and carry little value. And then here we're in the process, and in 2 years, we're going to be increasing the property values. And I think this puts another kind of strange twist on it for developers as well, to kind of figure out the sequence and the timing of all that.
Plus, we talked about something, and thank you, Lisa, you just reminded me of it. One of the things that you wind up doing in a situation like this is having to acquire property that has improvements, and those improvements have value. Now, you know, all of us on this call know what that area looks like, and so value is obviously a debatable question, but they do have value. So now I'm going to ask this party to assemble the property, pay for improvements that'll be no use whatsoever to their development, plus they've got to tear them down. This is how all this comes into play. This area is clearly desirable based on the highly desirable based on the feedback we've had, but we have this issue. So one of the things that Mark Murray suggested when in that prior meeting that we talked about is an approach where the city doesn't buy the property, but attempts to gain options that then can be turned over to a selected developer. In other words, it costs less money. The options presumably are transferable. You're not having to buy the land, although, you know, in this case, I think, and I'm going to let Mark address this further, you would need options of at least a year. The advantage to this is the developer goes in knowing what the purchase price of the property is, and I'm thinking that there are, I don't know, what would you say, Lisa? Probably half a dozen minds that would change pretty quickly if you could deliver that. Also, kind of connected to that is everybody's comment that pretty much the north side of Manchester is at least in their vision, not useful. And if you're going to assemble property, assemble the stuff on the south side, which is where you can build the most. That, of course, the net result of that is that the property on the north side at some point is going to get a lot more valuable as soon as the first thing happens. But getting any kind of development there is going to mean that there are going to have to be some arm's length transactions with residential property owners, although one of the developers did make some inquiries along that area, and there are apparently willing sellers. So I don't know. That's kind of an aside. At this point, the focus, I think, Lisa and I believe, and she can readily correct me if I'm wrong, is basically ought to be on the south side. And if we want to sort of tailor it, the acquisitions that would be the most useful at this point, or options that would be the most useful at this point, and where people have sort of gotten excited, is the western area, basically from Salem, where the development concept shows the traffic signal, which is another item. If you noted in the memo, people believe that traffic signal's critical. From Salem west to the boundary, that gets you a development area that borders most of the park development. One of the development schemes that was put forth to us it's a 5-story multifamily development stacked on a parking garage with ground floor retail. And if you laid it out right on the site, for example, one of our microbreweries could go into the western end. So that's an option. So Mark, you want to take it from there on that subject, on the subject of land acquisition?
Mark, before you start, I think one of the commissioners, just to make sure that we have a basic level of understanding, one of the commissioners was wondering if you could explain what an option is. And I thought I would let the professionals do that rather than me.
Sure. So an option is different than a sale contract in that the contracts we have been signing with landowners in the Brentwood bond area thus far have all been sale contracts, which subject to certain conditions are essentially a promise to buy the property. And if those conditions are fulfilled, we're going to buy it. An option is a little different, and then an option is just like it sounds. It gives us that option to decide to buy it later if we feel like it, but there is no promise that we are going to exercise that right. So typically what that means is the option requires payment of non-refundable money in a relatively, I'm not going to say nominal because they're not cheap, but a relatively small amount of money that gives you the right, the purchaser the right, to elect to buy that property within a certain period of time. You don't have to buy it. You can walk away from it. You never have to buy it, but it gives you that right to do so.
At a known price, right, Mark?
An agreed upon price. Yes. So the option, you would agree to what the sale price is. Now there's ways that's dealt with. It can vary in some ways. So for example, most people who give an option on their property want you to exercise that option as quickly as possible because they don't want their property tied up. So many, sophisticated property owners will say, I will give you an option and you can keep that option open for 6 months or a year or 18 months or whatever it might be. but the price goes up if you don't close quickly. So I might sell you my property for $100,000 at the 6-month level. You close within 6 months. If you don't close in 6 months, but you close in 12 months, maybe it's $110,000. And then maybe if you don't close that in that 12-month period, but you close in the 18-month period, I want $125,000. The other way that people deal with that, having their property tied up in an option, is there's sometimes additional option payments due. So you might say, I will pay you $100,000 for the property, but I have to pay you an additional option price every 6 months to renew my option beyond that original 6 months. So essentially, we would expect that most property owners would, it will be cheaper to acquire the property quickly, but if we want the flexibility to hold the option open for a year or longer, we'd either have to pay a little bit more at the purchase price or pay additional option fees as the time goes by. The options would be transferable. So if we have a developer that we enter a development agreement with, we would expect that the developer would take an assignment of those and close and pay the purchase price themselves, so the city's not paying the purchase price. In addition, we'd expect that a developer to reimburse the city for the option fee and any additional extension fees for the option. So that's that way we would acquire the necessary rights to acquire the property without having to actually without having to close on the property and spend the entire purchase price.
Plus manage it in the meantime.
Right.
And if I could just also add, I guess I would ask myself the question, why would the property owners be interested in something like this? But I think is this 2-year construction period is going to be really rough down there. There's just a lot of stuff going on, especially when MoDOT's project, although we don't know when they're going to be working on our segment here in Brentwood. It's a 5-mile stretch they're going to be working on, but nevertheless, I think this construction period is going to be more than probably an inconvenience. So I don't know if that's going to mean, but I think there is more probability that some of the multi-tenant buildings or just the ones that are rented out to tenants, property owners might have troubles trying to keep tenancy in these buildings. Some of them have already tried to sell their buildings. There's quite a few properties down there that are actually on the market. You maybe don't see a listing sheet on it, but we know of properties that would definitely be available for sale. And so again, I think during this transition period, this might still be something that some of these property owners would consider.
Thank you very much. That was a great explanation, all of you. And Mark, John was going to have you talk about some things in addition to that.
Well, we've had, I mean, that's sort of what I think is the big issue. We had some folks, we had one large developer who back in probably November maybe or October had shown an interest in the project and talked to both Andy Struckoff and I, and we're unbelievably excited and said we'd do the whole thing. And this is an entity that has the money to do it. Then when we talked to them in April, it was probably June. The question was, well, why did you release this RFP now? And there's still a land acquisition problem. And attempting to link it to a market that is somehow was somehow in their mind unknown on account of COVID. My response was twofold. First of all, the city was never looking for somebody here who was going to build something tomorrow. The intent was that the city would establish a relationship with the developer with a project concept in mind, and you know, when a shovel actually went in the ground, there was going to be that would be 18 months down the line at best. And most development projects take that long. From inception to actual construction is typically 18 months and sometimes 2 years. So that response kind of surprised me. The COVID scenario, at least everywhere we've seen this around the country and in the St. Louis region, doesn't change anybody's mind. The amount of online sales, for example, if you're looking at those things that would be generally retail related, don't impact, they go up and down as people you know, go into panic mode. If you look at retail as a general category, and depending on what you put in the retail bucket, what has been most hammered are eating and drinking establishments. Restaurants have just been killed with this. And we want some of those to happen in this development. So, you know, if there's something to be concerned about market-wise, that's the kind of thing that is maybe a consideration. But I can tell you that the two microbrewery folks that we have been talking to were actively looking for second locations, and their attitude is, well, this COVID thing's going to be over. So recognizing that, again, this isn't something that happens tomorrow. The other thing that was expressed to us, this came to Lisa, although some people commented on it, but I didn't feel it a big issue. They have raised the issue of whether or not the city would consider, for example, a TDD to construct a garage that multiple users could access. In other words, it would be a public facility, sort of like what U City did in the Loop. That's certainly something that can be considered if somebody puts something on the table. But what it means is that the whole question of incentives is probably going to have to be revisited somewhere down the line, because the developers are going to ask for something. If nothing else, that the garage thing might be an issue, although the apartment developers didn't raise that point. The question of land value that I talked about before may come into play. Somebody may ask for, I don't know, they could ask for 353 tax abatement as an offset to having to pay for property improvements that and the demolition cost. I think that's a bridge you cross when you get there. The only thing I will tell you, which is I think what I told this group and the Board of Aldermen before, the notion that there isn't going to need to be some kind of incentive here is maybe not realistic. I'm just being honest with you. Again, the developer, you don't know that until the developer, actually puts something on paper and starts to figure out his costs. Lisa, what else was on this list? I'm looking at it here on my other screen.
Well, I guess maybe, because they might have some other questions about what was in
and
the
the
memo.
traffic signal. Pardon me.
I'm sorry?
The traffic signal was the other item that has a cost associated with it.
Right. But Chairwoman Bilderback, I don't know if we just kind of want to open up the floor maybe to the members and kind of get some feedback on what we basically said about property assemblage. So
Lisa, we forgot the one other thing that we want this group to ponder and to think about how we go about it. We've also had the suggestion that the RFP be kept open. And if we're going to do that, then I think, and if we're going to leave it open without setting a closing date, then Lisa and I have talked about some form of mailing that would go out to everybody that keeps that promotes the area, talks about the fact that there has been interest, that the city is keeping the options open, and then encouraging people to talk to us. I mean, Lisa and I fully intend to keep the conversation going.
And John, that was actually something that I was going to mention. I know Steve's got a question. Hang on just a second, Steve. I think that's definitely something we should look at. And I mean, even just with the COVID situation, even though that it doesn't come into play in some ways with this and in some ways it does, I think that that's kind of a no-brainer right there, and we could figure out how to do that. So I think that that's something really important. And the other thing that you guys had mentioned in your memo was the idea of having some sort of a pre-submittal rather than a full submission. So maybe that's something we can talk about a little bit more. So just kind of hold that in your mind. And I want to go to Alderman Lockmiller for any question or comment because you had your hand raised.
I guess, John, so is it the kind of scenario, if we build it, they will come? I mean, if we get done with the streetscape along Manchester, we get the flood lines moved, we get GRG in there and all the park amenities, that'll spark interest that, these guys just don't seem to have the vision that's what we're planning on doing, or?
Well, that's another option that you have. In other words, you just sit on everything and let that go forward. And when things actually start looking like what they're gonna look like, all of a sudden the interest will ratchet up. Now, the flip side of that coin is, so will the property prices.
Sure.
Probably dramatically.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, do you get a sense that they're saying COVID because they feel like, oh, it's not the right time to do this, but is it really a concern of their own solvency? I mean, is it how are the developers doing as an industry, right? And could they be just dragging their feet, just kind of see where things end up so that they can make sure that their company is going to be still viable within 6 months to a year? So not start the process of a big project like this until they know, okay, COVID's behind us. Now we can start to really invest as a company. I kind of feel like them passing it off on, well, it's property, you don't have the property assembled. If COVID wasn't here, I would guarantee you that people are going to be, the developers would be going going after the property and not really worrying about it. I got a feeling that that's the case.
And
John,
I-
can I take that real briefly?
Sure.
Because we had a real estate Missouri bar meeting on Monday where had some brokers talk about the real estate market in Missouri. And really in St. Louis County, the St. Louis area, office uses are doing surprisingly strong. Industrial, which is not going to go here necessarily, is really, really strong. And retail is surprisingly strong if it has a component that allows for a drive-through or pickup, as you might guess right now. I don't need to speculate, and John can certainly chime in on this, but I think if we've got a developer out there who's got a kind of a mixed use mindset, the COVID shouldn't really damage their plan, their vision that much. If they are strictly wanting to throw up retail frontage, then yes, that could be an issue for their plan. But I don't know, John, if you've got thoughts on that.
First of all, none of the folks that showed serious interest and had multiple dialogues with us, or I think with Lisa, are folks who I think aren't really solvent. In other words, they don't have an issue. They don't have something out there that's killing them somewhere else. The multifamily folks have been in talking with us from the get-go, and the upper end multifamily is one of the hottest markets anywhere, quite frankly, including Metro St. Louis at the moment. So the folks who were interested in that development on the west end, I don't think it's COVID. They talked about not wanting to do the land assembly. In other words, you got a site we can go, we're ready to go, but we don't want to get involved in trying to buy property, and particularly don't want to trying to buy multiple parcels to make it happen, and trying to and having maybe to use eminent domain to get it. I don't know. I think Jeff. I think the scenario where if everything starts, once things start showing and shaping up, the development community will also all of a sudden come knocking, and so that's the scenario where you sit back and wait, and certainly that's an option. I'm not telling you should do one thing or the other. I just think if you want to get something so that that when all those improvements are done, you've got development components that will be ready to go. I think the land acquisition thing is the way to kickstart it, or the option thing. I'm not suggesting you go buy it now.
Right. I hear you, but I think I'm not sure it's the right optics for the city too.
I understand that.
If a developer's gonna have some heartburn over doing it, we've always kind of taken the route of only really impacting the properties that we need for flood mitigation. The rest of it is up to a developer to do. So I kind of feel if we start to shift our mindset of, okay, now we're going to do a land grab here, and I know it's not necessarily that, but you know, so that it makes it desirable for a developer to come in. I just don't know if that's the right optics for us. I do think, however, given the response, given the still interest in there, given the fact that we still don't know what COVID's going to do over the next 6 months, I like the idea of keeping the RFP open. And if it's not unusual to have it open-ended without an end date, then I'd say let's do that. In the meantime, we continue to do the construction work that we're doing, and the area improves and we mitigate the flooding over the next year. I think, you know, that should change people's interest significantly. That's my opinion on it. I'm not sure I'm ready to do the option angle, but I'll let others talk.
Tony?
I don't know if this is a necessarily relevant question, but because I know we're talking about developers, but what is the commercial vacancy rate right now in Brentwood? It seems like we have significant, like the Pier 1 site, there's the West Community new development that has vacancy. So what is our current vacancy rate for especially commercial property within, I don't know, the last 10 or 15 years? Do we have that data?
We are not readily at hand. When we last looked at it as part of your bond issue, Brentwood historically has among the lowest rate. You don't have a mall, thank God. So your vacancy is all, you know, in freestanding buildings, or in other words, things that aren't linked to a mall. And we can probably find out that number. But I will also say that if something historically in Brentwood has gone vacant, it's backfilled pretty quickly. In fact, it's backfilled among the fastest in terms of commercial sites in the metro area. Now, I'm saying that without having looked at data, you know, recently. In other words, within the last, I don't know, 12 or 18 months. But Brentwood usually doesn't have trouble filling good spaces. Bad spaces don't fill. Or they stay on the market longer.
Right. And that would be my observation too. We're going to go to Jack and then back to Steve. Jack? Unmute yourself, Jack, please.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Sorry, that would help. In the memo, there was talk of one person had mentioned a market study. Has that been completed, been discussed, and do you get the sense from talking to some of the other developers that potential that might break some of the ice and get them a little more comfortable about what sort of uses are, you know, in demand, or what they kind of forecast for this area?
Well, I don't know why they would have asked for that, Brent. I mean, well, let me back up a minute. The RFP had a significant amount of key market information that was current. In other words, that was current and very relevant, and is the kind of stuff virtually everybody in the development community looks at. You know, in other words, yeah, it wasn't. It was based on a market study and data that was done again for your bond revenue analysis, and then the key elements of it were updated. So I you know, everybody, Mark just ticked off what everybody in the development community in the region knows about what's what, you know, and for example, if you look at office vacancy in some sectors, you would say, well, why would anybody build an office building? Well, but one of the proposals that was on the table, complete with a fairly basic but idea site plan, was on the east end of the development, where the concept plan shows an office building. And again, that was from a developer with a tenant. And I'm assuming that tenant is probably still out there and the developer is still out there. Now, having been on a phone call that involved that project with Lisa and Bola, and I think Mark was on it, you know, they wanted to be named master developer and control the world, and you know, they were told no, city's going to go out for an RFP. So I don't know whether they went off mad for a while. I don't know. I would tell you not to spend money on a market study, just because the core of the commercial core of the region, which is Brentwood, Richmond Heights, the west end of Maplewood, and Clayton, are like the gold standard. The only thing better than that was Chesterfield, and of course, now that the mall is a failure and it's being redeveloped, and there were too many outlet malls out there. We'll see, but I would not tell you. I would tell you not to spend an effort to do that.
I actually, John, I agree with you about the market study. That was my reaction to that as well. And I do want to add one piece on the office thing. And I know that we've discussed it here, and it's discussed in the memo as well. As we've kind of gone through this process, as we've gone through COVID relative to office. So for any of those that would be considering office as a part of their mixed use or whatnot, I mean, there have been some major employers that have started making decisions that they're not going to go back to their office environment, and they may need, and then they'll need less office and re-envision the office that they will have for when people do come back. So as much as there may be some developers who would be looking at office as part of it, unless they already have a specific tenant in mind, they could have a little bit more uncertainty in that could play, you know, maybe it's a more minor role, but then when you look at the banks and how they get their financing, you know, I don't know for sure, because we haven't talked about the banking, how they would view it, even if a developer is solvent, you know, like we talked about earlier, they still borrow money to do their deals a lot of times, and you know, different types of loans and stuff like that. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. I don't know if you want to say anything about that or not, but then we'll go over to Steve, who had a question or a comment too.
I would only echo your comment. Nobody in their right mind builds a spec office building right now. On the other hand, if I pay attention to our architecture division in Kansas City, we're seeing a lot of people who haven't necessarily decided they need less office space, because the people are happy campers working at home. They're discovering that, in fact, that's not necessarily true. What they're having to do is rethink their office space. And, you know, you have all these folks who went to the open office environment. We did that in our office for our St. Louis office for big bucks. And the only smart thing we did when we did it is that all of our workstations, nobody's closer than 8 feet. And so now when we're in the office, you know, our rule is you get up, you put your mask on. It's not like some of the others where they got rid of the cubicles, and, you know, and the people who come in for rotation kinds of work where your desk is here this week, but next week it's somebody, that same desk is somebody else's. You know, people are rethinking that scenario. Nothing I have read suggests that all of a sudden there's going to be a complete crash of office space. And you know, maybe I read too much of this stuff, but you're right. Nobody's going to build office space that doesn't have a tenant.
Yeah, and the things you were talking about too, the Business Journal just in the last, I think, 24 hours did a piece on it too that talks about something similar as well. Steve, thank you for being patient.
Sure. I guess just for the commission's benefit, I think if looking at the north side, and I'm not speaking for the whole board, but I can tell you I don't think anybody would go for starting to assemble residential properties on the north side for a developer. That's a no starter there. So if we go and concentrate on the south side, as John recommended.
Steve, I wasn't suggesting that.
Well, not you, but a developer, it sounded like.
Well, there are those who have looked at okay, well, what can we buy this next row of houses, you know? I mean, and there are, they've apparently got a favorable reaction from a few people, but they're the ones who'd be doing the buying, not the city.
Okay, well, that's good, because I don't think we would want to help out there. I mean, if the property owners are up for selling, hey, let the market decide. But
that's the idea.
I think one of your points is to concentrate maybe on the south side of Manchester Road. But then I think the temperature is very cold on using eminent domain for the benefit of a developer. You'll never get, the board, I agree, would not go for that. So I'm just wondering if we either, you know, as you suggest, stay in touch with these people as we develop that area, and maybe look at a subsection of the south side for the brewery or whatever, and maybe do an option type thing there.
That's the west 13 acres.
Maybe there, and yeah, we've already spending $80+ million down there. I don't think the board's going to want to spend any city funds to acquire property, but maybe options might be a possibility.
Well, that was our thinking, and also there's a reason that area has merit. How am I going to say this? We have actually tried to steal development from elsewhere, where we knew the scenario with the parties involved wasn't going well, including the municipality, and that site is, that 13 acres is sort of a ideal configuration, and it's the right amount of acreage for some of the other things that are out there. I won't describe what I did in an effort to get some other people interested, but that's why I threw that out at the beginning of the conversation. If you're going to contemplate doing anything anywhere, that's probably from an option standpoint, that's where you, in my opinion, want to do it, because that's where all of the improvements, that's where the really pretty stuff is going to happen that is adjacent to that site.
And is that possibly a more of a residential developer, a multifamily type developer for that area?
I think that is exactly what it is. I think I think they sent the site plan out in confidence, so I don't want to distribute it. Lisa and Bola have both seen it, but yes, it's a luxury apartment development. It's basically 5 stories. It takes up, it would take up a site of roughly that size. And it's stacked, they have, the site plan that we have is just the apartments. Then they've built a similar facility elsewhere where it's stacked over commercial space at the ground floor. which is what we would want to have happen, you know, so that you have ground floor commercial space facing Manchester.
So
Right.
let's pause this for just a second. As I understand it, we only have Mark for maybe a few more minutes. Mark, did you want to add something before you have to go?
No, I wanted to say I do have a conflict coming up here in a few minutes, but I can be a few minutes late for. But I wanted to see if anybody had any kind of legal questions about the project or what we're doing here before, law-related questions before I drop off.
Well, are we being asked to decide anything tonight? Like, I guess I'm just, like, are we just being given an update, or what is on the table for decision that we would perhaps need counsel for?
Twofold. You're being asked, well, first of all, you're being given the update. And secondly, the request was going to be whether or not what you wanted to recommend to the Board of Aldermen at their next meeting, which is essentially the three items that John covered at a high level. Land acquisition, do we want to ask for, do we want to try to do an assemblage with options? Do we want to recommend that to the board? The second item to consider, for you to consider tonight, is whether or not you want to, and I think we haven't voted yet, but I think everyone's kind of nodded their head, keep the RFP open-ended. And the third item, was incentives. And that was kind of tied to the assemblage issue a little bit too. And essentially they're not committing the city to any incentives, obviously, but whether or not the city would consider incentives to support a project, and specifically for things like public infrastructure, like John was talking about. If a traffic light has to go up at Salem and Manchester, and as part of that, the developer has to donate land to MoDOT and or the city to facilitate the construction there, is that something the city would be willing to consider a TDD or some sort of other incentive for? So
Plus
those are three items.
And you need a southern connecting road, for example. Probably the key thing that needs to be decided tonight, if anything's going to be decided, is, or recommended to the board, is keeping the RFP open with then a follow-up that, Lisa and I can devise what that follow-up looks like. I think to me, it's critical we keep talking to these people. The ones that have shown interest. The secondary thing is whether or not you want to make a recommendation to the board to consider the option scenario that Mark just talked about. To me, everything else is kind of secondary.
Yeah, I would agree that you could certainly defer any action or any discussion of the incentives and or land acquisition strategy, but recommending to the board to keeping the RFP open would be at least something I'd recommend considering tonight.
The other two items seem premature.
Yes, I agree with you, Tony. The only reason that this memo even addresses the incentive issue is because it came up, and we think it's important, how that it came up and the context that it's likely to come up. When we get somebody to actually sit down. And I almost forgot this, that in connection with keeping the RFP open, do we want to
The cost.
allow people to submit a preliminary site plan? Sherry, you talked about that earlier. It's kind of what you sometimes do, like if you're doing a plan development. There's a preliminary plan and then a more detailed plan.
I think that's, a pretty good idea. I mean, back when we did the promenade, we had a whole RFP. We had 3 phases that covered all the way from Brentwood Boulevard down to Hanley Road. Obviously, all that took us a really long time to get it all done. But when we first did that, we went through kind of that process, like what you were just saying, John.
And then the developer isn't required to put up a fee for that. Or if they are, the fee is nominal. It's you know, it's like, show us what your idea is, and we'll go from there.
Now, the thing to keep in mind is what happened when we did that is things can change from preliminary plans. But this would be different because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not like we would be picking them and saying, oh yeah, you are our person for this, like based off of that. They would then have to go through a second, like almost like a second process, because what we ran into when we did the promenade was we had this huge thing on all these phases of this area. And then it went from this European village thing to like, we took it to the marketplace and this is what the marketplace said they wanted. So it went from one thing to the other. I think doing it now a little bit differently, like what you're talking about. I mean, it's not like we're signing on the dotted line doing the preliminary thing. And I think we might get more interest and also get some idea and more dialogue going. I think the more dialogue you guys have with these developers, and I think that preliminary would give us that dialogue, and that marketing piece happens in that dialogue. And I think it also would get them involved sooner because, and you want that not only because of the cost of the properties going up, you know, as the improvements are being made, but the closer that you can work hand in hand with developers from the beginning, you can help each other. Like the city, you know, we can make things work better. Like if the developer knows something that we don't know about a certain thing or how it would work, we can change things by partnering together. So the sooner we can get them in the door to start working with them and sort of putting some pen on paper, I'm thinking the preliminary piece could be very helpful to that process.
Yes, and we have one developer who the principal of that firm that we know actually lives in Brentwood and offered to sit down with us and talk about it. So
that would be great.
I mean, I think you're right. I think you know, you're absolutely right.
And Andy had his hand up a while back, and we sort of segued because we knew Mark was going to have to leave. Andy, did you?
Yeah, and I think it's something we might want to get to before Mark leaves. So I think it sounds like there's not a lot of appetite for this eminent domain on that side of things, but I guess I don't have a good understanding still of what this this options process would look like. Does it potentially or even necessarily include something like that, or is this just a negotiation? I mean, it sounds like a lot of what the developers are looking for is that certainty, you know, eliminating some of that risk and just having some cost certainty, timelines and whatnot. So is this just potentially just a negotiation with these property owners to get, these options just to have a number, to get a price set, or?
It's purely voluntary. We would make an offer, or you could retain a real estate broker to make offers for you to acquire these options. It's a purely voluntary process, and we cannot force anybody to sign an option. If the city ultimately decided to use eminent domain, you can't offer an option in order to acquire the property. We've spent a lot of time with the board of Aldermen talking about making quote unquote good faith offers to property owners. A good faith offer is not an option. You cannot submit an option as a good faith offer, because a good faith offer has to be a contract to buy the property. So if the board does decide to recommend to the Board of Aldermen that you consider land acquisition using an option, it would purely be an arm's length transaction with each property owner without any kind of threat of eminent domain.
So are you saying that once you offer an option, you cannot then proceed with eminent domain?
No, you still can, but you must make a good faith offer, which cannot be an option offer. You must give them a contract saying, I'm going to buy your property subject to the following conditions. Like, you have to have good title of the property. Like, you cannot file condemnation action based on making somebody an offer by option.
The scenario with the option is basically to see, well, first of all, it would tell you what you can buy without eminent domain, what the likely price is, and if you can put together that, let's say that using my earlier example, that 13 acres, and what does it cost? And now you can sit down, excuse me, at the table with the developer and say, okay, we have options on this property. Now show us what you'll build.
And John, I hate to interrupt you, but I'm getting texted by people about my next meeting. So
Mark, can I ask one more quick question?
Sure.
If you put down an option, you put down a sum of money. If you don't execute that option, you lose that money, correct?
You lose that money. That's
right.
the price. That's the price to do an option. You give them non-refundable option money to allow them to agree to keep their property off the market for the option term.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I had to leave.
Okay. So I think, on the assembled options, like when we talked about that one section that John was talking about, and ultimately then, some of these things, I guess as far as who pays, it's the city, but like who pays the non-refundable amount initially, like obviously would get paid back through the developer later, presuming that we were able to go through it with the transactions. But if we look at just that section, I keep going back to like what happened with those 3 phases that we had, when the very first developments that we really did in Brentwood that ran from Brentwood down to Hanley, starting with the promenade, and those ended up being split up into sections. And I almost wonder, like, as we talk about this, there's a little bit of cost or risk on the cost involved and a little upfront cost on those options. But if we took that section where there seems to be this interest and had went about the process to do the options to get it kick-started and get that that section done, you know what I mean? That maybe that would drive more interest and also more certainty than, like you said, on the property values. I don't know, like, John, what you think about that.
Well, the option process carries risk, and that it's important that everybody understands that. But it also does exactly. It also offers the opportunity to do exactly what you just described very well. And sometimes nobody will do no one I don't think will do the promenade anymore, because that was an eminent domain nightmare. Although at the end of the day, most of that property was bought without the use of eminent domain, and there were 5 holdouts that I think you had to ultimately condemn, that were all parcels down along the creek. So the other thing it does for you is tell you whether or not you're going to have acquisition issues.
Yeah, and just to be clear, by referencing that, I'm not recommending the eminent domain thing. I don't want anybody to.
No, yeah, right. No, I understand that.
Yeah, yeah, but the assemblage part, like, is with the options. But Steve, you were asking something about that. I know. Yeah, go ahead.
Sunny has her hand up also.
Oh, Sunny does. I saw Jack had his hand up. So, Steve, why don't you go? Then we'll go to Sunny and to Jack.
Well, I'm just wondering, John, on this option thing, do we really have to explore that right now? If we leave this preliminary RFP open, and that's just another negotiating tool, the option part of it.
Yeah, no, you don't have to. Lisa thought very important for you guys to know where there seemed to be a hang up, and that we heard it fairly consistently. So I think, you know, we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't tell you that.
Sure.
The
I just want-
option thing is something that you can decide later. The most critical thing is to decide, in my opinion, to whether or not you want to leave the RFP open, whether or not you want to you know, put in writing the fact that you'll accept preliminary proposals, or whatever, you know, whatever term we want to ultimately give it, and continue the dialogue with these people and see what happens.
Yeah.
And then you can always make the decision down the road, if you want to try the option thing. I thought it was important you knew that was an alternative.
No,
and that you knew that a lot of people were raising that issue.
Okay.
And then the same with, like, obviously we talked about with the incentives. Those are things that every big development we've come in or that's had an RFP, they always come to us and say, this is what we want to ask for. And sometimes they get it and sometimes they don't. So I don't think we need to worry about that so much either right now. Sunny?
Oh, thank you. Madam Chairwoman, can you hear me okay? I'm in my car.
Yeah, we can hear you, and you've got a great background in your car.
I echo Alderman Lockmiller's sort of take on this, and I think I'm sensing a consensus. I mean, why don't we just keep the RFP open? All of these are important issues, but I feel like they're, you know, ones that will be flushed out when we're able to drill in with more specificity as to what we're dealing with. I mean, I'm sure that John will be able to beat the ground and get some insight into, you know, oh, hey, if you're able to put an option on this parcel and cobble together with that other parcel, we got something in the works. But as far as what we can do tonight, it seems like, you know, it's whether to keep the RFP open, which I would support. I'm not sure if this is a in the weeds kind of question, but when I heard back earlier, there was discussion about having to submit a site plan. Maybe a proposal exhibit. Is that at all a deterrence? I've just encountered that in my work life, that if they have got to spend the money on that kind of draw up, that's a deterrent. I mean, is there a more flexible approach we could provide? I mean, I don't even know if that's appropriate for one of our recommendations for this evening, but that came to my mind when it was discussed, I think, a couple topics ago. But in my view, generally, I think I don't know if you want a motion or if the discussion is nearing an end. I would make a motion to keep the RFP open if we're ready to entertain that.
I'll second.
I think if we'll have some discussion, I guess, if we've already had a second. Can we add to that the preliminary plan idea that we talked about?
If I might, Sonny, what I had in mind was, and what in fact, some communities, I'm trying to remember your ordinance, but some communities in their zoning, plan development zoning, for example, allow for the submission of and an initial meeting, usually, where the developer submits a very rough site plan or a sketch plan, and it's not anything that they would build from, but it's the thing where they lay it on the table and say, look, this is generally our idea. And a lot of times, if they've built something like it, like the one developer who sent the stuff to us, they will give you pictures or drawings, and that will say, we'd like to replicate this kind of development with these kinds of building materials, whatever. They're not, in other words, they're not going to tell you it's exactly what they'll
Conceptual.
do,
It's
but it's
right,
what
it's a
it'll look
concept plan.
Yeah.
And the
more
an advantage of
conceptual
that,
than
John, is
the
basically that
drafting.
you're eliminating the fee, right? You're having some sort of
and eliminating the fee.
preliminary.
So that the idea is to, Sonny, you hit it on the head a minute ago. The idea is to, and I think Andy sort of alluded to it earlier, the idea is to not cause them to have to spend a lot of money to explore and discuss with the city what their idea is.
Yeah, it's lowering the barriers.
Yeah.
Right. So I was hoping perhaps Sunny, and then it would have Steve was the second, that perhaps you might be willing to entertain an amendment to the motion that would cover the idea of a preliminary or concept proposal without the submission fee to go along with the RFP extension that you just moved on.
I don't have an objection to that amendment.
Steve?
I'll second.
Okay, great. So we have a motion and a second. We're going to have a discussion. Jack, I know you had your hand up before.
Yeah, I just have a quick high level. So taking the area that John had mentioned from Salem and then west, south of Manchester, could you give me just a, I don't expect to go parcel by parcel, but, and I know there was some acquisition through the Brentwood bound and the flood mitigation, but what percentage of that would need to have options, or what still needs to be acquired in that area?
I will let Lisa answer that because she's got the data. It's like, are there 10 parcels in there, Lisa, or is it more?
And the biggest
Well-
chunk is going to be the storage.
The storage
Yeah.
thing is the biggest one and the one that might have the most value, quite frankly.
That one, and also the retail strip center that's in there, that sits on about an acre. It's that multi-tenant
Yeah, where
strip
Time for
center.
Dinner is.
Yeah.
And then
But
Kate Hart.
otherwise, I mean, in that area, the city already does own some of the property because the Public Works facility is within that area. And then also the parcel that we have just to the east of the Public Works facility is already owned by the city. Again, I would say it would probably go up to about 8,300 Manchester, which is that 1 acre parcel that's just a vacant parcel right now. And the city bought 2 parcels behind that for the flood mitigation purposes. But that would be the first parcel, and then moving over westerly. Because then that, again, if that traffic signal would happen there at Salem, that then the land would already be available for that as well. So those would be the 2 main ones, but then there are probably, there would be 3 other parcels besides those 2 smaller parcels.
So less than I
You-
but I
And then you get back to what the city owns because we're purchasing it for the underpass. So,
Good, thank you.
So are there any other discussion items on the motion? Okay, we have a motion and a second on extending the RFP, keeping that open-ended, and also on the preliminary concept proposal without a fee. Would you please go ahead and call the roll?
Andy Burkemper,
And please unmute yourselves, folks, to vote.
Andy. Did you vote? Yes. Alderman Gould,
Yes.
Alderman Lockmiller,
Yes.
Tony Ponder,
Yes.
Reibenberg,
Yes.
Jack Shelton,
Yes.
Alderwoman Sims.
Yes.
Good, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 8 yeses and 0 noes. The motion passes.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so is there any other things that we need to discuss about this agenda item? I'm presuming we're done on this item. Is that correct? Okay. All right. So executive director's report.
I wanted to make one announcement. This is just really information purposes only. There is a project that has been proposed for the Brentwood Bound redevelopment area. It's on the north side of Manchester, though, at the corner right at Hanley and Manchester, the bank property, those two parcels that are owned by the bank. But right now there is a proposal for a FOSS swim school that is going through the review process. And last night, it was forwarded on to the Board of Aldermen from the Planning and Zoning Commissions. Now the Board of Aldermen will take that up on at their December 7th meeting. It needs conditional use and site plan approval in order to be given the green light. So I don't want to talk, too much about the project to influence that vote in any way, but I just, in case you pick up on that or you've heard about that, I wanted to let you know that the city did receive that application probably the end of September, first part of October. So that is one activity that's going on in the redevelopment area at the present time.
Thank you very much.
Did Jeff have a question?
I do, and if you don't mind, during the planning and zoning discussions, did they talk at all about the little fishes? What kind of effect that might have on a business that's already in Brentwood? The Little Fishes.
So there is ownership from the FOSS swim school in the Little Fishes school, so that one would close. Does anyone else have any questions about that? Again, I don't mean to cut off the conversation or questions about it, but again, with it still moving through the process right now. So, but, and then the only other thing really is just to say we just have some housekeeping for the Redevelopment Corporation coming up. It's time to file our annual report. So I'm getting some assistance from Mark's office to get that detail wrapped up by the end of the year, turn that into the state. And other than that, I think that's all I had. But if anyone else has any questions for me.
Lisa, I would like to offer up any of you who want to call me, and I'll be glad to share with you discussions and who the discussions have been with and all that sort of thing. It is not, however, I view that as the development community is very sensitive to having someone conclude that they're doing something when they're not doing something. So as you saw in the memo, we've, while Lisa and Bola and I know who we've been talking to, we're not, putting that in any form at this point, because we really don't want to scare anybody off who is in this clutch of people who've shown, I think, positive interest. So, but I'm glad to talk to anybody who wants to give me a call.
Thank you, John. Not seeing anyone with their hands up for Lisa, so I think we'll go on to the next meeting, which is scheduling a next meeting date. So Lisa, do you think that we should schedule a next meeting, or is it something where you don't know when we need to meet yet?
Well, John and I had said that, again, tonight the direction was to go ahead and proceed with leaving the RFP open at this time. So we're going to go ahead, assuming that the board is going to agree with that direction as well. We'll go ahead and start preparing the letter and the information that would go out to that developers list. If that would go out then, say, the first week in December, then I think John and I were talking about maybe we try to reconvene the Redevelopment Corp again January. I believe we said maybe the week of January 12th or January 11th, I guess it would be. So that way we can continue, John and I can continue our dialogue with those that we've been speaking to. So I would maybe throw out there if the Redevelopment Corp would want to try to have a next meeting, either maybe Tuesday, January 12th or Thursday, January 14th. I know the 13th will have the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. So
how about Thursday the 14th?
Thursday, January 14th at 6 again. Does that work for most, or?
say yes because nobody objected.
All right.
Hey, Kelly, when is Public Works that month? Public
Oh.
Works,
I'm not, we're still working on all those schedules right now.
Yeah. You're probably right about that though, Steve. That would generally be the conflict with the Public Works. That's correct.
On
I mean,
Thursday.
Public Works, is it, I believe is that at 7 usually?
No,
Am I-
Public Works is usually at 5:30.
That's right.
So
So
do you want to do that Tuesday then? The 12th? The 13th is Planning and Zoning Commission, in case anybody's wondering.
The 12th works for me.
Yeah.
Good for me.
At 6 or 5:30?
6.
At 6? Okay. January 12th at 6. Okay.
Okay. All right, so next item on the agenda is if there's any citizens' comments again.
I also see Sunny's hands raised again.
Or is it?
Oh, no, I don't think I know how to turn that function off.
Okay.
So I don't have any questions.
Andy, I would like to follow up with you. I'll follow up with you via email regarding all things beer.
Let me know if you guys get together.
So, and just for the record, there was no citizen that wanted to speak. I know we had a citizen attending. Okay, thank you.
Comment.
All right, so anything else?
Motion to
Lisa?
adjourn?
Is that your motion?
Yep.
Great. Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
All opposed? Meeting is adjourned.
Do you have a
7:29
question?
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy
Yeah.
Thanksgiving.
You too.